My name is Dale Schaefer, and I'm supposed to talk about my Elmwood. And it's difficult to pick a aspect of this cemetery to talk about. And when I was asked, this monument immediately came to my mind because it's a very special monument out here. I love telling the stories of Elmwood, and most of them are interesting. All of them are interesting. Some of them are funny, some of them are sad. This one is in a category all of its own. This one, even though it's on the audio tour now and is one of the more requested sites for people wanting to visit, this will never be a happy story. And this is the story of the Tennessee Children's Home Society and Georgia Tann, who has come to be known as the baby thief. The story came to me originally and when the book, The Baby Thief, came out in 2007. And I read about it in the New York Times, and there was a brief synopsis, and I couldn't believe what I was reading. And I thought, that happened in Memphis? So I got the book, and I was blown away. It not only happened in Memphis, it happened right there in Midtown in front of under everybody's nose, and for 26 years, nobody stopped it. I never forgot that book and what it said about what happened here in Memphis. And years later, when I was working at Elmwood, the story came to mind again, and I remembered reading in there, it talked about the fact that Georgia, when some of the children would die under her custody, she didn't like to bury them because graves left a trail, and that there were purportedly hundreds of children died under her care. And but it said that there was a large public cemetery in Memphis that had a plot for the Tennessee Children's Home Society. So I was thinking about that one day at work, and I thought, oh, I hope that's not in Elmwood. And I started doing some research, and I remembered seeing a list of fraternal plots out here. That's things like the Masons, the Oddfellows, organizations that had purchased large plots for the burial of whoever. And I dug around and I found it again, and there in the middle of that list was the Tennessee Children's Home Society and the location of the plot. So I went to the plot maps, and I'm sure my mouth fell open because there was a list of 19 children that were buried in this plot. Starting, I believe the first burial was in the mid-1920s. The last burial was in late 1940s. And most of them, all of them, but 3, did not even have full names. They were just Baby Bobby, Baby Sue, Baby Ann. 3 had a full name. But I doubt whether that was their child's birth name. Some of them had causes of death. The last 3 had died of some sort of, they either said dysentery or gastrointestinal diseases. Dysentery was a bacteria of the bowels, and they usually basically died of diarrhea. Easily fixed with medical care and proper supervision, which none of the children with Georgia Tann ever got. So I had this list, and I came over here, and there was nothing here except a big empty plot. I wasn't even sure where it was because there was nothing here. And I told myself at the time, there's going to be a monument of some sort on that plot if I have to buy it myself. And I envisioned a little 1x2 marker just saying Tennessee Children's Home Society or something. And I talked to the executive director, Kim Bearden, and she thought about it, and she had a bigger vision for it. She wanted a bigger memorial. Well, we started off just getting some little donations here and there. And while that was going on, she was envisioning and drawing up and working with, I believe, Crone Memorials on a larger monument, which it basically evolved into this. And the price was $13,000, which Elmwood didn't have, I didn't have, and we thought this will take us 20 years to get this much money. So Kim got the idea of getting someone from the Commercial Appeal to come out and listen to the story and maybe write something about it for the paper. He came out, and my feeling was he didn't get the story, really. He didn't seem terribly interested. I don't know, I wasn't optimistic about what he was going to do with the story. And I was shocked the next Monday morning. I opened up the paper, and the banner headline, front page, was this story and Elmwood's role in it. He did get the story. He understood it. and he wrote it with a passion. And by the time I got to work that morning, a very generous local woman had called the office and offered to pay the full amount for the monument, $13,000. And she did it before the day was out. So we got the monument, and its purpose is to remind people never, ever, ever to let something like this happen again. I mean, from 1924 to 1950, thousands, they estimate approximately 5,000 people, kids, went through the Tennessee Children's Home Society. Most of them were stolen from their birth parents. Georgia Tann had a very, very complex, elaborate, well thought out system. And as she was creating that system, she slowly became a national authority on adoptions. And for those of us who were raised in the 1950s and 60s, if you were adopted, your past was obliterated. Those records were never opened. It took an act of Congress to open those records. Georgia Tann created that system, and it was basically to cover her trail of what she had done. People had to have known in Memphis. 20% of her children came from the juvenile court system under Camille Kelly. She had to have known that something was going on. And it was a dirty trail all the way from Memphis to Nashville. And nobody questioned what was going on. Or if they did, they kept their mouths shut. Until shortly before Georgia Tann's death in 1950. Georgia was sort of protected by the Crump government and the regime here. And his power was waning. I don't think Crump had anything to do with it. But he was losing his power, and people weren't afraid of his system. And there were younger people in Nashville were willing to buck the system. And so they started investigating Georgia Tann and couldn't believe what they found. So they were getting ready to indict her for stealing or misappropriating around $1 million worth of Tennessee state funds that had been paid to the Tennessee Children's Home Society. And 3 days before she was to be indicted, she died of cancer. So she never, ever paid the consequences for what she did. Nobody ever paid the consequences for what she did. There was a steel door fell over that whole story after her death because nobody wanted to know, everybody to know that they were involved. And it stayed that way pretty much until the 1990s. And then when the book, The Baby Thief, was written, that opened it up. Now, the book was not a big seller, I don't think. It never made the bestseller list to my knowledge. But in 2000, we dedicated this monument in 2016. Actually, next week will be 4 years since this was dedicated. A year later, a book came out called Before We Were Yours by Lisa Wingate. And it was a fiction book, but Ms. Wingate really understood the story. She researched it very well, and she created this family that had been ripped apart by Georgia Tann. And the book became a bestseller and was on the New York Times bestseller list for over a year. And the story just blew up. And we started getting people, wanting to know if this was the place, and wanting to see the monument and whatnot. And a year or so later, Ms. Wingate and another woman wrote another book called Before and After. And because of the success of the first book, Georgia Tann babies started coming out of the woodwork, looking for answers as to who they were, where they had come from, what happened to their birth parents, etc. And that book was a bestseller also. So we had Ms. Wingate come out here to talk in the chapel and to just tell the story of what she knew about the baby thief. And she arranged to have a reunion of Georgia Tann babies, who were now all in their 70s and 80s, that same weekend. And she brought 7 or 8 of them with her. And it was one of the most moving afternoons I've spent in a long time, just listening to those people tell of how Georgia Tann and the Tennessee Children's Home Society irrevocably altered their life, sometimes occasionally for the better, and often for the worst. There was one story. I was choked up listening to this woman. She was in her 70s, and she was a baby. She remembers nothing, but she was told by her parents that her parents desperately wanted to adopt a child, but they were too old. But they were good people, and they approached Georgia Tann, and Georgia Tann had a baby that she wanted to sell them. And she sold these babies for $750 to up to $5,000, or sometimes more. She had a very angelic, pudgy little cute boy that she wanted to sell them for a fortune. And they were going to do it, but they were in the office, and they kept hearing this baby crying in another room. And the father just kind of wandered back there and wanted to know what that was about. And he saw this homely, sick baby in a crib whose eyes were matted shut, who was having trouble breathing, who had sores, and his heart went out to it. And he said, "No, I want this one." And Georgia Tann goes, right, "Oh, no, 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 you don't want that one. She's not well." Well, Georgia Tann was going for the bucks. Everything she did was for profit, maximizing profit. She had a commodity to sell, babies, and the cuter they were, the more she could get for them. And so she sold them this baby for little or nothing. And they took the baby to the hospital immediately, and it was allergic to the milk that she was being fed and would have died. But they got her the treatment that she needed, which Georgia Tann was never going to give her. She grew up, she was loved, she had nothing bad to say about her birth parents. They saved her, basically. But she would have died, like these children, had she stayed with Georgia Tann. Another woman was abandoned. She wasn't stolen. She was abandoned by her mother along with two siblings. And she told their story, and she brought one of those siblings with her. She went to a good home. Her brothers were sent to California, split up, and went to horrible homes. One was deceased, and the one she brought with her was in a wheelchair. Their story was retching to hear what happened to those kids, and they never ever did find their birth parents, who their birth mother was. Some have been able to trace their birth parents, sometimes with good results, sometimes with not. And the thing that I think plagued most of them was they knew that their birth parents, particularly their mothers, never ever knew what happened to them. And nor did they know really what happened to their birth parents. And that is a horrible thing to spend your life thinking about. So this story should never ever be forgotten. And that's the whole point of this monument here, is that these 19 kids, and we'll never know who these kids were, who their parents were, or what their stories were. But we know they existed, they were here, and they languished under the reign of Georgia Tann and the Tennessee Children's Home Society. And we want that story to be remembered so that it never, ever, ever happens again. And if someone still, there's still child abuse going on in this country, and people still don't like to report it. And I just want to say, if anybody ever suspects that a child is being abused and neglected, report it. It's not a mark on the parents. If nothing is happening, nothing is going to happen to the family or the parents. But have a professional go in and evaluate it. Call the Memphis Child Advocacy Center. Call your local police force. Contact Department of Children's Services, I believe it's called, in Nashville. Somebody will come out and check out the home, see what's going on. These children don't have a voice. They can't speak up for themselves. And nobody is going to if we don't. Nobody spoke up for these children. And if they did, they usually paid a heavy price from Georgia Tann and her regime. So we're proud to have this monument out here. We're very grateful for the woman who paid for it. And I'm always kind of thrilled when people come in the office and want to know where it's at. Because they come out here and you can see they leave little toys and trinkets here. They often leave flowers here. People find this story very, very touching. I'm Dale Schaefer, and this is my Elmwood.